All right. Well, hi everyone, and I just wanted to begin by mentioning the work session that we're having tomorrow with the entire Planning Commission. The agenda for which is the first half of the agenda is our committee presenting briefly in 15 minutes our ADU findings and recommendations, and then time for Q&A for other members of the Planning Commission to ask us about that. My thought on that, I'd be delighted if anybody else wanted to do it, but if you guys, if I don't have a volunteer, I will be happy to present our memo. And then when we get to the Q&A, though, I think it'll be best if everybody, fields questions as they come up, as you deem appropriate. If you have something to say in response to people's questions about why did you do this, or why didn't you do this, or what was your thought process, I think it'll be helpful to have many voices on that. So that's the first half of the meeting. The second half of the meeting is to discuss a matter of interest to both committees, or I guess a series of topics of interest to both committees, including things like minimum residential lot size, possibly minimum street frontage, other sort of geometric attributes of buildable parcels. So that's something that it's not really a presentation from the other committee, although generally in the future, these work sessions will be, each committee will present one topic that they've worked on. But this is one that both the MAP committee and our committee are interested in, and that are sort of within all of our jurisdiction. And so just be prepared for, I don't know if it'll be Brad taking the lead on that, but presenting, kind of a summary of where we are, what considerations went into the policy we have now, what history there is about times when we've had different policies, and if anything bad happened then, and stuff like that. Just I think which will inform some of our discussion of density in RS zones and other things like that, and various other ways to increase the supply of buildable lots. Hey, Jim, I was just giving a brief preview of what to expect at the work session. Jim's an hourglass now. Hopefully you can still hear me, of what to expect at the work session tomorrow. With that said,
I haven't heard about the timing of that. When is that supposed to be?
Mark and Robin, do you have the time off the top of your head? I thought it was 6, but I'm not 100% sure.
It's 5:30 to 7:30.
Thank you. 5:30 to 7:30. Oh, it's in an email from, I think they came directly from Brad. Yeah, so that's the plan for that work session. And then Mark and Robin, do you guys know, is our Thursday meeting, is the agenda still as extraordinarily beefy as it appeared to be when we got our packets last week? Nothing's dropped off that you know of, has it?
I think so. I think it's still. Oh, did 2 drop off? Which ones?
I'm pretty sure Highway 29, what are they calling that, Lakeside Manor, to be tabled. And then, kind of pull it up right here. I thought something else got tabled as well. I don't know how Highway 29 can do their project as own. Maybe that's the only one after I look at this.
So that's.
I thought Aaron was calling for a table on one of his, but I'm pretty sure Highway 29 can't happen tomorrow.
Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing all of you again a great deal this week. But here's here we are now. So let's continue our discussion of inclusionary zoning. First things
Just
first, I
one
wanted to
point.
ask Mark, I had it in my notes that one of the things that would be happening from our last meeting, between our last meeting and today, was that you would be continuing that process of reaching out to developers about input, formal or informal input about what sorts of incentives would be attractive or useful to them, and either in the smaller scale development, detached single family, or all the way up to larger multifamily development. So have you gotten any feedback that you want to report on?
No, unfortunately not. Every year, this is our busiest 2 or 3 weeks of the year, with folks going back to school and major projects getting finished up, including Mathis, which I walked through the other day. I think you guys would be happy to see it. So yeah, I sent a few very quick emails out, but I think a lot of those same people are also doing the exact same thing. They're on the other side of it, but involved in the exact same process that Robin and I have been involved in for 2 weeks of trying to get some more student housing CO'd. So hopefully before our next meeting, I'll have a little bit more feedback. I certainly should have a little bit more time after tomorrow. I think we're finally getting everything wrapped up tomorrow. So
Okay.
I'll stay on top of it.
Thank you. So I'm looking at the agenda for our last meeting with that numbered list of items, and we've gotten through quite a bit of it, and we jumped around a little bit. So I'm going to just identify the things that I think we still need to talk through. But if I skipped over anything, please don't hesitate to flag it if there are other things that we need to talk about. So the one item that I had circled that that we had not really gotten to but wanted to come back to was the question of payments in lieu and sort of alternative methods of compliance, right? With the most straightforward model being a development that's going to build X number of units, maybe gets a density bonus or a parking reduction or something to build more units, and then some of those units in exchange are offered at affordable rates in a way that's protected over a long period of time. And those affordable units would be developed in the simplest approach on site as part of that development. Many cities have found that developers resist that sometimes and prefer either to develop off-site or to make a payment into a housing trust fund so that the city or whoever it is that administers the housing trust fund can develop those units or can partner with nonprofit developers to develop those units off-site. So let's just talk about that topic generally. What do y'all think about that? Is there any resistance, first of all, to the idea of offering multiple means of compliance? Does anyone think we should just say like affordable units have to be in the development, or are we pretty open-minded about that? Yeah,
Matt, I think you can make a pretty good argument for encouraging one way or the other, but not excluding any options. It's kind of a cop-out to say, oh, well, yes, I want affordable housing, but I want it somewhere else as a developer. And I'm not sure that's what they would say, but I can see that sentiment being expressed in general. If we have an authority or a group that administers this, there will always be a need for additional money above and beyond maybe the housing stock, and that they could use or invest in some other way to advance a program. So I think it makes sense to not rule out allowing payment in lieu of something else, or developing a separate community in another spot, adding some houses somewhere. And any one of those on-site, off-site, or cash money is probably worth talking about.
Alice?
Yeah, I just want to, I agree with everything that Jeff just said. I think the last time we talked about having the city attorney come talk to us, and I think that this is one of those questions that it's not entirely clear in my mind if payment in lieu is good and allowed under Georgia law. I mean, or just what's our legal risk? Again, I served my time as a commissioner under the previous county attorney who really saw payment in lieu as what's the word that's explicitly
Taking.
no, it's softer than that. A something tax. It was interpreted as a tax, and I think that under a voluntary program, this will not be an issue at all. So that's one thing I want to say. I just do want a legal opinion on where payments in lieu stand. If we have that as part of our program, which I strongly think we should. To address another issue that Jeff touched on, I know we've all done a lot of reading about inclusionary zoning recently. One of the takeaways that I've gotten is that, a goal of inclusionary zoning is to truly have mixed income neighborhoods. So there would be some maybe downside to saying, well, you're not going to build in this development that you're building. We're going to put over here in some, public housing kind of thing. But I really think that that where we stand right now in Athens with our housing and community development department in-house and our very strong partnerships with the organizations that you all know about, ALT and Habitat and AHA. And I'm really not concerned about that. We're a small enough community that if we can do payment in lieu and someone who wants to do a high-rise student development says, I prefer that because my development's not really a great place for families to live. I really want that to be an option. And I have a lot of faith in the work the infrastructure that's already in place to ensure that those payments will be put to good use and will further that goal of integrated neighborhoods.
Yeah. Sarah.
I agree with what Alice just said. I feel a lot more positive about the payment in lieu option than I do about the option the developer can build affordable units elsewhere. I think that could get complicated in terms of what time frame does that company have to do that. It could run into that faith that I think Alice was just expressing, that trust in our local sort of leadership and sort of boots on the ground housing people. I don't have that trust to a developer. I mean, not in a sort of inherent way, but it's just that's not what they're doing. That's not what they're experts in, is creating affordable housing options. So I'm much more positive about the payment in lieu option than I am about that third option you mentioned of allowing them to build these units elsewhere. Because I also think that could kind of counteract some of the goals or sort of undermine some of the goals we have, and that could concentrate affordable housing in a particular part of town or in a particular building or whatever, which I think is one of the things we're trying to limit.
Yeah,
I agree with that. Very well said.
Yeah, I agree with everything that everyone just said, for what it's worth. I do think and I share, I think Sarah's and probably everyone's skepticism about having the for-profit developer develop the units off-site, because the incentives there are for them to cut costs as much as possible and not necessarily build desirable or high-quality units in desirable locations. Whereas if it's administered by an entity that is in the business of developing affordable housing, then there can be an RFP process where the city, whoever's in charge of making these decisions can make sure that what's going to get built is optimal from the city's perspective and from the perspective of the residents of those affordable units. And I think it's so, but, I think as a college town, in other cities that have dealt with this sort of thing, when they've decided to insist that the affordable units be on site, it's precisely because of the desire to have mixed income neighborhoods and mixed income buildings and integration of people at different levels of the socioeconomic spectrum. which is super important, but also college towns are a little different for the reason that I think Alice mentioned, that, you know, families don't necessarily want to live in a building with 500 undergraduates. And nor do I think, you know, it would be good policy for us to insist that those affordable units be developed in a place where that would be the result. So, so yeah, I'm very open-minded to the idea of payment in lieu. It sounds like we're all pretty much on the same page there. And I think my understanding of it is that the way that, two things. One, the way that you structure a payment in lieu program is you ask hypothetically what it would cost to build the unit on site. And then that's the amount of the payment. So the payments can be fairly high. There can be a bit of a sticker shock, but you know, if it would cost $90,000 to build out a 2-bedroom apartment in a high-rise student building like the Mark or something like that, or $125,000 or whatever it would cost, that's the amount of the payment, because they get to use that unit instead for the for a market rate unit.
Yeah, I honestly don't think the sticker shock would be that high, right? Because I mean, we're basically giving them more density. Is that
exactly? It's an optional program, so developers will opt into it only if it makes economic sense for them to do so. And so it's really, I think, a fundamentally just an economic and accounting question, to which the GIC information you sent around before last meeting, Alice, had a lot of good background on the construction costs and profit margins and so on. But it's just a matter of figuring out what the value is of the additional market rate units. And so that's how I think these payments in lieu are calculated. On the takings thing, I'm certainly in agreement that a meeting with the city attorney would be nice, Mark, if we're able to make that happen. I don't think it needs to slow down our work, or that we need to hold up while awaiting that. I think it can inform our work if we're able to get that meeting in a timely fashion. But I also think the previous city's attorneys, if the advice was that it was unlawful because it's just taking a property, I think that's premised on it being a mandatory program rather than an opt-in.
yeah, and I just want to clarify that the takings is the wrong word. I use that word, but I tried to come up with the right one. But it's some sort of use tax occupation. But sorry, I'm interrupting. But I agree that I would assume that we're fine with this if it's a voluntary program. We can certainly move forward with our recommendations of payment in lieu option, and then let the attorney sort it out then.
Yeah, I'm getting the word taking from my notes of last meeting and also Jim's minutes. There was a reference to it. I think Mark mentioned that, maybe it was Mark. Sorry if I'm putting words in your mouth that were not yours, Mark. But in the last meeting, that had been the city attorney's previous guidance to the planning commission or the mayor and commission. But with all that said, I think a meeting with the city attorney would be a fine. Jeff, do I see your hand up?
Yes, I just wanted to say that expressing the desire for payment in lieu, legal or not, at least it gives something for our legislative committee that they convey to the state legislature that, you know, if we can't do this, we still like to, and here's a perfectly valid reason why. So, you know, it expresses the desire to do something which we may not be able to do yet, but would like to.
Yeah. And I think that if municipalities are free to make agreements with developers where we give them something and they give us something, and a non-mandatory opt-in program probably has a great deal of leeway. But you're absolutely right. We should write it up regardless. Okay, so payment in lieu seems like a fine idea. And one other thing that I will throw in here that may be not much more than a footnote now, but it was in something, it was an observation that was made by one of the resources that Alice or I sent around before the last meeting, which was that once a payment in lieu is on the table, that opens the door to a far wider type a range of types of development that can be offered incentives in exchange for these payments, right? If someone's building condos, you can incentivize them by giving them more density, and they can build more condos, and some of them are affordable. It's hard to incorporate that into commercial or retail or office type developments. But if there are payments in lieu, if there's a payment in lieu program and someone's building an office building or a commercial development of some sort, and they want, to be have an expanded floor area ratio or a reduced parking requirement or something, greater density, it's within the range of options available to us too. Maybe include those sorts of developments in the program too. And so just wanted to mention that, not necessarily something we need to talk about extensively now. It may be, just one more thing to include in our recommendation that this is something that the Mayor and Commission may want to consider doing, and which other cities have done. Okay, so looking at the remainder of my marked up agenda from last time, I think we talked a little bit about the question of what we would require from developers to qualify for this, what they have to give in order to get X incentive. But I think our discussion of that has reached maybe the limits of our knowledge at the moment, right? We probably need input from developers about what incentives are useful and attractive before we can really start to write up a table of, for this incentive, you have to do X. For that incentive, you have to do Y. Is there anything else on that topic of the sort of incentives and requirements that anyone thinks we should be talking about right now?
I agree with what you just said, Matt, that we need some input from developers. This gets us into this, sort of kind of fine-tooth reading of the code. That I think that my GIT committee always assumed, we need people who understand the code, like Mark and Robin, who are sitting here before us, to sort of get into that. I also think that when the work of getting specifically into incentives, I'm going to feel more comfortable doing that maybe in the committee of the whole with public input. But I think that, as we talked about last time, the service that our committee can offer to the Planning Commission is we can have some meetings with developers and get some ideas that we can throw out there, and then we, take the pulse of the public tolerance for this, and then staff has more guidance and how to bring back options for us.
Okay.
Staff members, feel free to weigh in on that claim I just made.
Yeah, Mark and Robin, I was just going to ask for your input.
So yeah, no, I think one of the important points, and I think this came out in the email that I forwarded along you guys after our last meeting, is that different projects need different incentives. So to understand how big the menu is that could be out there for developers, I think would help us understand a bit more about how it might work in different parts of town or in different zones and those types of things. So I think at this point, I think we go broad, and like you guys are all saying, take that to the Planning Commission, or even if we leave it broad, to go to the Mayor and Commission, so that they understand that a developer in one part of town needs less parking, like at Mathis, whereas a developer in another part of town, needs a whole different strategy and, might have plenty of parking. So I think that would be the way to go personally.
Okay. So another thing that we kind of danced around a bit last time that I think we haven't, there may be some more room for us to talk about now, is in single family zones, what sorts of incentives might we be willing to consider? Is that something, I mean, obviously developer input's going to be relevant on that. We're going to want to talk to people who build single family homes. But if somebody's, you know, subdividing a lot, and it sounded like last time we have substantial agreement that it would be good to allow someone who is doing a multiple single family sort of development to perhaps have relief from requirements like the street frontage requirement, the minimum lot size requirement, other sorts of things that constrain what they can do. And I think in an email no, this wasn't an email. This was something you said at the last meeting that I read in Jim's minutes, Mark, that in talking with people like Michael Songster and somebody else you mentioned who do infill development, that you got the sense from them that apart from density increases, which would be very nice, it would also just be helpful to have more flexible use of space, because there's a lot of lots here that are, if they meet the 60-foot street frontage requirement, they're so deep that they wildly exceed the minimum lot size requirement for the zone. And so, you know, more creative use of space like flag lots, cottage courts, et cetera, things like that are other incentives that might be appealing. And so my question ultimately on that is this something we're ready to talk about now? Is this something we need more developer input on? And is it, I mean, I think it transcends inclusionary zoning. This also gets into topics like cottage courts, duplexes, triplexes that are on our agenda to talk about very soon. And so if y'all think it's worthwhile to begin talking about it now, let's do that. If you think we need more information and input from the community before we do so, then I'm open to that suggestion as well. Jeff.
I was just sitting here a minute ago thinking of how to craft an ordinance that had a sort of a build your own and, you know, variance or whatever. And, you know, would it be insane to let the developer come up with his own sort of incentive? And so, which I thought, yes, it is insane. But we probably do, if we're going to get anywhere with it, we could talk about things that we might be in favor of. But I think it's important before we spend a lot of time to listen to what these guys would want. We need to get a broad enough selection of input, though, to make sure we cover what Michael Songster wants may not be what developer Z wants. So, you know, I can imagine those being two very different things. And we could bat around some ideas. We've seen a lot of ideas, but what works in this community and what's desirable? What is going to make them want to do it? So I kind of feel like, yeah, we can talk about it, but I don't think we should spend a lot of time on it right now.
Sarah.
Do you think, though, I was just, as you guys were talking, I was looking at the designer input email that Mark had sent right after our last meeting, and kind of thinking about that obviously we need input to come up with what developers would be incentivized by it. But I think what we probably can discuss is what we'd be willing to give. You know, those are kind of two different lists. And we've sort of danced around a little bit. You know, we talk about density and different ways to express density, whether it's bedrooms per acre, or if we want to start, you know, we don't tend as much to talk about floor area ratio in our, as much as like one of the ordinances you sent us, maybe the Ann Arbor one, that really does, that the floor area ratio is kind of the basis for how they seem to talk about density, at least in that inclusionary zoning one. But maybe that's we have some ideas in that email that were given to us. And I suspect that's going to be, you know, a process of getting more input and kind of thinking about that. But maybe we can talk about, you know, what we would be willing to, maybe, I don't know the best way to talk about it. Could be like, in a, you know, you know, to put it like in loose terms, like what we really, maybe even looking at some examples that already existed in town, like a couple of the student high rises downtown. If we had another crack at those, what would we be willing to give? With those, is it just as simple as additional density, additional bedrooms per acre, maybe some sort of relief from downtown parking or parking requirements, or maybe we could sort of look at a few different types of things, and maybe even thinking about like a couple of these cottage court proposals that have come in front of us, like to sort of get our heads around 3 or 4 concrete examples of types of developments where this could happen, and then in those scenarios, what would be appropriate gives on the part of the county.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I'm sorry, Alice, I just saw your hand up. Go ahead.
No, actually, you go ahead, Matt, first, and then I'll.
Okay, I was just going to say that in thinking about it, a lot of the things that we might offer as incentives for, I'm thinking about in particular, somebody's got an acre or two that they're trying to build half a dozen houses on. A lot of the things we might offer as incentives, like allowing them to do some sort of flag lot thing or a cottage court or smaller street frontage, or, you know, those things are on our agenda for changes in the ordinance that we might make anyway, right? We might revisit any of these things. So it may be sensible to largely stick a pin in this question until we get feedback from developers, and also until we see where we are going in terms of recommendations. Like, for instance, if we were to recommend something like, you know, reducing the minimum lot sizes across entire zones, you know, make RS8 into RS6 or something like that, 6,000 square foot lots, or, you know, which I don't know, maybe if that's the direction we were headed, then that would certainly, then there's a new baseline on which we would be building incentives, right? And so it may be premature to talk about incentives much before we know if there's a new baseline and where that new baseline is.
I have an odd suggestion. One of the cases that we're going to consider at the next Planning Commission meeting involves effectively applying for some density incentives already. And the question on that is, are we going to consider it under our existing rules, or are we going to consider it in the context of thoughts about revised rules? It's going to be a very interesting test case, I think.
Someone has been doing his homework early and reading ahead. I admit that I am not yet prepared to talk about the Thursday agenda, but I will look forward to that. Jim, thank you for bringing that up.
I have one other thing. I looked through my email list. I did not see a message from Brad, so it might be helpful if somebody could send me a copy of that, because it may have been sent to the wrong address again.
Okay. Happy to do, let's see, Planning Commission work session.
I haven't sent a link out for the WebEx yet, so I'll get on first thing in the morning. It was just an email saying it was going to happen at that time. If that'll help.
Just sorry to interrupt, Mark. If you could maybe let Brad know, he did use Jim's wrong email address again.
Okay.
So, because Jim, the one you like is the UGA one, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you look at Brad's email from July 29th at 10:32 p.m., that has Jim's wrong address.
While y'all are sorting this out, I'll just make the comment sort of in response to Matt's question and Sarah's comment on it. I do agree that the question of what we're willing to give is sort of the crucial question, because that's exactly what this is. It's a community coming together and saying we're willing to give certain things in order to get more affordable housing scattered throughout the entire community, not concentrated in one development, but everywhere. All the schools, all the neighborhoods, everywhere. But that is a really, really big question that I'm just not that comfortable dealing with as a subcommittee, the Planning Commission. I think that is one of those questions we put on, put in our memo, that this is what the community needs to grapple with. Also, when we get into things like flag lots and cottage courts, I do think we're getting into that overlap zone with the other committee. So again, I'm uncomfortable saying, yeah, we're for flag lots, yeah, we're for cottage courts, without thinking about the future land use issues that the other committee's already dealing with. So I agree with Matt's phrase, let's stick a pin in this, because we're really pointing to like the big overarching issues that the subcommittee's not going to settle on our own.
I agree with that. And the other thing that Matt, I don't know, did anyone else besides Matt and I attend that Missing Middle webinar last week that Lucy had been emailing about? I thought it was really interesting. There were a gazillion things I thought is really interesting about that whole concept. And one of the things that really jumped out at me is the notion of affordability by design. And Matt, you said something a couple minutes ago about looking, it might be that some of the things some of the changes that hopefully that we would recommend or that might happen in the next year or so would actually make, I think the idea of inclusionary zoning ordinance being this a voluntary program a developer can participate in is a great idea. I think we should have it. I don't have a ton of confidence in it yielding a ton of affordable housing units in Athens, but I don't think that's any reason not to do it or have it. But I am really interested in the idea of kind of thinking about some of the ideas put forth in the missing middle housing stuff about, looking at some of the concepts they were talking about, like the setbacks and frontage and depth, sort of lot depth and building depth. I thought that was very interesting. And so my hope, I guess, would be that we can recommend changes or building some of that in a little bit. I don't think those are that, I don't even think that's that big of a lift. But that gets us a little bit off topic, but ultimately I agree with what Alice just said, is the concept of deciding what we're willing to give is really more of a community question. It's a commission question, and then it can be driven by community input. So I agree that it maybe just as a point that's on the memo that this is one of the $64,000 questions is to come up with that.
I think it would also, it may be helpful with developer input and then also significant staff input. It might be helpful if our committee can come up with some examples of the things that the community might be willing to give some room on. I would like to, as we continue this process over I guess we're still meeting every 2 weeks until October, November, whenever it is. But I would like to consider that question as can we come up with a list of possibilities that people can then react to.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I was actually going to say, regarding what you just said, Sarah, that my proposal for our next agenda item for our next committee meeting was going to be missing middle housing, which I think touches on things we've already talking about very soon, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, street frontage, just other sorts of alterations to the geometric requirements. And missing middle, for those who didn't attend the webinar or aren't super familiar with it, the concept is essentially multi-unit buildings that are scaled like a house, that from the outside look like a house, that are not obviously distinguishable from a single family house, that blend into the neighborhood they're in for that reason, but that happen to contain 2 units or 3 or 4 units. And I think that place we saw in the corner of Lumpkin and Carlton Terrace is a nice example of that. It's fairly obvious because they use different bricks that's a duplex, right? That there's 2 different attached units, but it doesn't have to be that way. Sometimes they actually just look very much like a house. And so they, they're a nod to the historic character of the neighborhood, while also promoting walkability, because if you have more people living in the neighborhood, you have more support for small local businesses and so on. And so they build the kind of neighborhoods that people want to live in. And so that was going to be my proposal. And I think you're just building on what you said, Sarah, that there's a lot around that issue for us to talk about. And I think perhaps you and I can share some of what we got from that webinar at our next meeting, and then we can talk through some of those issues then.
Just to add to that, I haven't seen the webinar, but I intend to before our next meeting, and I'm familiar with the basic concept. But if anyone wants to see some great examples, please come over to Normaltown. Just park your car somewhere and start walking around. There are so many examples of exactly what Matt described. Just duplexes and sometimes quadplexes that are designed exactly like the house next door. So I'm a big proponent of this approach to increasing density in our in-town neighborhoods. I understand the political waves that might make that difficult, but I think this is a really good time. I think people are very tuned into these issues, that we need more affordable housing. We need it to be closer to the center, and we can make it attractive and create units where someone who is a police officer or a school teacher, especially starting out, can afford and be Athens-Clarke County residents instead of having to be pushed out to Jackson or Madison or Oglethorpe.
Yeah, and one actual just interesting historical note that I discovered recently. I hired a student to pull some historical information together, including zoning maps and stuff from Athens-Clarke County over the years. And like many places in the South, Athens started to zone in earnest after the Brown versus Board of Education decision, when it became illegal to by law segregate schools and other things. And then suddenly there was a great vogue for single family zoning. But even up into the 70s, we look at our zoning classifications now, and there's RS5, RS8, RS15, RS25, and then there's all these RM areas, right? RM1 mostly, some RM2, very little RM3. Until the late 70s, it was divided into 1 and 2 family zones and multifamily zones. So there was no such thing as a zone where you couldn't build a duplex. Every single family zone was actually a 1 to 2 family zone. Duplexes were part of the standard, developer toolkit. And that's why you see so many of them in Cobham and in Boulevard, and in Normaltown even more so, which was built more in that sort of, 1940s to 70s range. So true single family zoning is a quite recent innovation. It's younger than I am in Athens. And I still feel very young. So that's saying something. Anyway, just a historical note that
historically you are very young, Matt. Historically, very young.
Right, by geological, thank you, standards in terms of the run of human history. I appreciate you saying that, Alice. So yeah, missing middle next time, duplexes, et cetera. And I think it's anyone who hasn't yet had a chance to watch that webinar. I think Lucy did send around the link to the recording, and I would highly recommend it. It's super informative and very well put together. It's about 90 minutes long, I think. So if you've got the time, I would highly recommend it. Okay, that brings me to the end of my list. What am I missing in terms of inclusionary zoning that we still need to talk about? My thinking procedurally is that building on, our notes and Jim's exceptionally detailed minutes, that we will perhaps, as a committee, generate a list of bullet points or some sort of memo that kind of records what we've discussed and the tentative thoughts about, like, we should allow payments in lieu and we should, this and that, just all the decisions we've tentatively made. And again, just a memo of everything we've talked about and decided or not decided or made recommendations on, that would be something that we would send to the Planning Commission as a whole, and that the Planning Commission, and then we'd present it at our next group work session for further input from them before we start to make it more concrete into something that might ultimately get sent from the Planning Commission to the Mayor and Commission. So do we have everything we need? Are there open topics still to be discussed before we try to put that memo together? Okay, I see no less an authority than Alice Kinman shaking her head on that one, and she is our resident expert on inclusionary zoning. So unless anyone else has something, I will take that as a sign that maybe we're ready to just try and write this up. And so I'm happy to take a first stab at it and send that around. I'm also happy not to if somebody else wants to. But I'm more than happy to do it. And
you did such a great job on the last one, Matt. You're nominated to do it again.
Thank you. So I'll do that and I'll send it around, and then people can comment by email, or we can talk about it at the next meeting and sort of get it final to where we want to send it to the Planning Commission. All right, so here we are, done a full 35 minutes earlier than has been our historic custom. So we could do one of two things. I think the missing middle topic for next time, I think, could potentially include a lot of different things. And I have, I described a few things that I think are included, but maybe we should just spend a few minutes talking about what do we want to talk about at our next meeting, not just duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, maybe alterations to minimum lot size or other things like that. But what else do we want to put on the agenda, just so everybody comes in having had the opportunity to think about the things that we're going to talk about? Yeah, Alice.
So if I don't want us to succumb to any mission creep here. We are supposed to be talking about certain things. The missing middle concept is so germane to the work that we're trying to do that I do want to have this discussion. I think that, I have a number of things I want to put on that list, but I'm not sure that it's within our current charge as the committee. Would this fall under the umbrella of inclusionary zoning, or more under the broader umbrella of how to increase affordable housing opportunities?
I think it is relevant to both. I would put it more in the second category, the broader umbrella of how to increase affordable housing opportunities. Part of which, such a huge part of housing costs is the cost of buildable lots. And so anything that, even something that says, if your lot is more than 150% of the minimum lot size in your zone, you can divide it into two lots that are 75% of the minimum. A rule like that suddenly creates potentially hundreds of additional buildable lots. And supply and demand being what it is, if there's 10 buildable lots and 5 points that are for sale, or 100 versus 1 or 2, the price is going to be lower, and so it becomes feasible to build smaller and more affordable houses on them. So yeah, no, I think all of that comes in affordable housing, broadly speaking. It may end up being relevant to inclusionary zoning to the extent that it takes the form of an incentive.
Yeah, okay, so I'm good with that. And I believe I sent around to y'all before, you've probably had the link sent to you 100 times, the workforce housing study that that I believe dates back to, it's a bit old too, but when we talk about affordable housing, you know, we had this conversation with Haley a couple of weeks ago or a month ago, I can't remember which, but there's the low moderate income according to federal guidelines. The affordable housing study addresses a little bit more specifically local conditions where here's the average wage in Athens-Clarke County, and here's the average house price, and here's the sort of gap between them. So these strategies that we're talking about now, things like duplexes in neighborhoods, cottage courts, et cetera, would presumably address something above the 120% AMI, or maybe starting at 80 and going to 150. So that's the middle, and the missing middle. Affordable housing, when people hear that term, they tend to think of lower to low moderate income families, householders, and the missing middle gets farther up into the, another rung or so above on the ladder. I personally am extremely interested in seeing if we can get housing options at every rung of the ladder. I just want us to be very clear that, now we're moving into talking about more what I think workforce housing is a useful term, because it sort of matches what the workforce in Athens can afford to pay versus what housing costs. And we are at that point talking about people that are above 120% of the AMI.
Yeah, the super important points. To me, workforce housing is right at the heart of affordable housing for a bunch of different reasons. And it's it may not. There are certain federal programs that define affordable housing for purposes of this program as being housing affordable to families making less than X% of the AMI, right? And so, but that's a program specific definition. And the example you used of a family where the main income earner is a teacher or a police officer or a firefighter, or you have two teachers. Their income is certainly above the area median income, and yet they're priced out of most desirable housing options in Athens and are forced into other counties, which is not desirable. So I think it's, to me, it's, as your ladder metaphor is great. If you make things affordable to people on the third rung of the ladder, the effect on existing housing, if you can build more new housing for the two teacher couple, who's on the third rung, the effect on people on the second rung is that more housing becomes available to them. And, and so it filters down the ladder. And so it does end up working to the benefit of even the poorest families in Athens or people in Athens. And in any event, I think, to me, the mandate that we have, as I understood, it was not strictly limited to like some federal program's definition of affordable housing as much as it was housing affordability in Athens. So that's my 2 cents. What do y'all think, Jeff?
It seems to me too that what you said about, if you can find a lot that you can build a duplex on and therefore recover more money, that's something a developer can do without needing, I guess, an incentive or having to pay into a fund or do something else that he may not want to do. It's another tool, and we get the same result in the end, because he can build a cheaper house. He can make money quicker, maybe not as much, but he can do it more often because there's more opportunity. And so we get the same result where we cover very low income housing that may be through a program like Athens Land Trust or something like that. And also we create the missing middle housing. I'm thinking of the administrative assistant at UGA who makes nothing and has to commute from Jackson County. If all of a sudden they could buy a half a duplex or a condo, whatever you want to call it, somewhere in Athens or that much closer, you know, we've gained somebody in the county without really having to do anything except tweak an ordinance a little bit. So I think that's the way I look at this. It's the same as an incentive, except there's no actual incentive involved. We just made it a little easier to do something that's still reasonable.
Yeah. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I would add a reinforcement to that. A number of things that make the world work are not particularly visible to the eye, but they're still very important. I remember that some years ago, Lucy Rowland pointed to me the book called Defensible Space. And it was basically a treatise on how you can make apartment complexes safer and better neighborhoods just by tweaking the design of those units. For example, they pointed out that large multi-family high-rises with lots of entrances and exits were inherently dangerous, whereas units of similar size but built around courtyards were much safer because there was always somebody watching the entrance. And it's just little design things that we don't even think about as being important turn out to be critical.
Mm-hmm. So it strikes me that the workforce housing study and the missing middle webinar are the two foundational texts for our next meeting. There's so much in the workforce housing study that's relevant to all of this that I think it would be, to the extent everyone's schedule permits, very worthwhile for us to bring ourselves up to speed on that. As Alice said, it's I think it's from what, 2012, maybe it's more than a couple years old, but it's you know the situation has developed, but it hasn't radically changed since then. It's just, you know, all of the same forces that were making it tough then are making it even more tough now. So I will plan to read that study again. I mean, to read the parts of it that I have not read. I just skimmed a little bit of it before in preparation for the meeting, and to the extent that everyone's able to do so, that will be great. And maybe that's, you know, having two foundational texts that we're going to come together and talk about, that might well be just enough material for us to work with for the next meeting. And Sarah, maybe you and I can just kind of, I guess we'll see when we get here. You know, if people haven't had a chance to watch the webinar, maybe we can just kind of share the 3-minute version or 5-minute version of the highlights.
I think one thing that I would also, you know, suggest maybe we give some thought to this, but I don't know whether we discuss it as a committee or how it fits in exactly. But one thought that I had when I was looking at the missing middle webinar is there's sort of the idea of looking for pretty minor tweaks that could be made to current code as a way of, you know, reducing barriers to affordable housing. And another way to look at it, which is not, these two things don't conflict, but is the idea of our planning department encouraging, you know, being very open about encouraging certain housing types and showing, you know, we talked about this in the context of ADUs, coming up with sort of a, I don't remember what we called it, but we talked about sort of pre-approved plans that could maybe be generated by a design competition, but also talked about sort of informative brochures or pages on the website that say this is the direction we want to move in, and this is, you know, rather than sort of making minor tweaks and hoping. I like the idea despite the fact that it costs, you know, more time and staff resources, but the idea of seeing, you know, accompanying some of these changes with resources that are developed for the consumer, for the developers, for people who want, you know, or home builders or ADU builders that really encourage, you know, that we're really clear, you know, without stifling creativity and knowing that, you know, I don't remember what the quote is about having the ridiculousness of planning anything because plans will always change, but the idea of encouraging, like, this is the direction, like a little bit more of a, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but sort of a motivation statement or a just sort of seeing, not just making these changes and hoping, but actually, you know, trying to encourage a certain types of things and making it clear why.
I totally agree with that, and that is the kind of thing we need from the mayor commission. I think an overarching policy statement that guides all of our planning decisions that has to do with how does this development impact affordable housing or housing diversity in Athens-Clarke County. So again, not the purview of this city, but I think that should be sort of an overarching goal that helps us to frame our thinking as we continue to deliberate on what we're looking at for next time.
And maybe a recommendation we could make that we think something like this is important, and that it would be, and taking that a step further, that it's worth developing resources for community members who want to participate in creating this more housing diverse community, rather than, you know, yeah, you know what I'm trying to say, I think. So, and I think that, you know, we've all been through this process of participating in the comp plan, and, you know, I'm a little bit, I don't know what to think about the comp plan process and the plan itself and how, I mean, I know why we do it, but I don't know, you know, I can't remember now exactly how housing affordability was dealt with in the comp plan, but it's there. I know it's there, and we can sort of connect to that, I think, in that statement and sort of the educational resources I'm proposing.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting part that I've seen in my position here, and I'm going to state this assuming my boss isn't watching this, but might see it one day. A lot of other departments that have made some changes, I'm thinking solid waste and public utilities and the stormwater department, have education specialists on staff. They've got people who work on their plans and work involved with the other members of their teams, but then they also go out into the community and they educate the community and they provide documentations like this. They show up at AthFest with fun things to do and information. It's something I've always thought that the planning department could benefit from. So not that you guys change positions within the government or anything like that, but I think that's kind of one of those things that could be addressed from what you were just talking about, Sarah, that I think is one of the things of planning that I've really enjoyed this group being able to do is to actually get out and talk about some of these things. If this conversation got expanded beyond the 7 of us, it actually happened. It's just something I think would be important, and I think that would be one way to get the community moving forward, to buy into some of those concepts, to understand some of those concepts a little bit better. So I say that not with a solution in mind, but just that, you know, there are other ways out there that some of the government kind of puts its best foot forward, and that's one of the ways I've seen it actually accomplished.
That's very cool. I like that.
It's an interesting connection. I've never met, you know, I've interacted a lot over the years with those education folks in those departments. And now that you're pointing out that the planning department doesn't have that, and maybe the need for it or the value of it wasn't wasn't as clear, but to me, just in the context of what you just said, that seems like a really great thing maybe for us to recommend, is that it's just a more proactive way of doing planning. And I get the sense from our planning staff that they're interested in that too. So maybe we can talk about whether we would want to include that in a recommendation or something.
We do have a neighborhood planner on staff, and he's sitting in this meeting actually.
There we go. So maybe we just need to be more supportive of that.
I can't believe this. Robin's been in every single one of these meetings. I didn't know he was neighborhood planner. Oh my gosh. There is a lot of potential on our very bright planning staff to do a lot of, I agree with you totally, Mark. The community outreach is important. I remember thinking about that when I was on the commission. That's when I was one of the commissioners that helped get the neighborhood planning units in place in the first place. But I think there's a lot of energy in the community to really engage with these questions. Like, we want more housing options. What's the best way to get them into our neighborhoods? Here's how it's already happening over here. So yeah, that's, a Mason Tao of the planning department, former student of mine, by the way, he's in solid waste. Absolutely would be a great thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I have a citizen response to that. When I was a graduate student, we were involved in a neighborhood organization in Madison. And one day, a planner from the planning department got in touch with our neighborhood organization and arranged a little meeting with us to tell us all about zero lot line housing. That was a real community outreach effort. And I know that you guys have a tremendous amount to do already. You don't have the resources and the number of personnel needed to do that, but I found that extremely helpful.
Just today, along those same lines, I was poking around in the corners of the internet. There's a guy called the Athens Politics Nerd who shows up on Facebook, and I think he's written in the flagpole some. But what he wrote about today was the lack of affordable housing in Clarke County, and there was a brief mention that the Planning Commission is exploring it, but it would have been nice if there was somebody at the planning department he could have reached out to where we could say, we have talked about it and we've made some progress, and it is our intention to do something about the problem that he's complaining that there's no attention being paid to. So yes, I think that's a very good idea, that there be a point of contact, at least someone who is responsible for communicating, yeah, we hear you and we're doing something about it.
And truth be told, they're I don't know if he said that or if you're saying that, but there is a point of contact with the planning department, and we're looking at 2 of them. I feel like our planning staff are ridiculously accessible. I thought that before as planning commissioner.
Well, yes, you're correct. And that was me saying that only because I noticed that he did talk to Michael Songster, and he talked to somebody else, but he didn't reach out to, as far as I can tell, and anybody on the planning staff. And I don't know whether that's just because he's not being thorough, or he doesn't know who to talk to, or.
No, I actually know this guy a little bit. He's a citizen journalist, and I think one of the reasons why he doesn't reach out to the planning staff is because there's not a point of contact. So I don't know that we can vet this much more in this particular meeting, but I do know from my long experience with planning staff, as it happens, planners also are very good communicators. So having let's just go back to the likelihood that we should make this a recommendation, that the planning staff should do more, should have the resources to do more outreach, to be able to reflect the community desires for these kinds of more dense housing, and explain what the principles are, and work with developers to help reflect the community vision.
Yeah, I think these are great ideas, and absolutely, I think all of this, including Sarah, your idea about maybe making a recommendation to the mayor and commission that they issue some sort of policy statement that should guide planning decisions along lines of, how will this affect housing affordability in Athens-Clarke County? How will this affect diversity of housing types in Athens-Clarke County and economic diversity of neighborhoods and so on? I think those are wonderful ideas. And I also, just as a concerned citizen before I was on the planning commission with an interest in affordable housing, it strikes me that there's a lot of people out there who are not professional developers, but who might be very interested in selling off a lot from their property or in some other way doing something on a small scale, and who would benefit from outreach from the planning department, from opportunities to educate themselves other than just reading the ordinance, right? Because that's a barrier for some people. Not everyone's legally educated or has the resources to avail themselves of expert opinion in the private market. And so just having the opportunity to learn more about what can be done, I think, just remove some of the barriers to citizens acting in ways that benefit us all. So I think these are all wonderful ideas. Is there anything else that we should discuss today? I hereby declare this meeting adjourned at 6:17 p.m., which makes up for at least a couple times when we went 4 or 5 minutes over. So now I think in the aggregate, we are back at our 90-minute per meeting goal. So
I'd like to see the data on that, but guys.
Thanks.
All right. See you guys.
So see you guys tomorrow.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Bye.
Mark, I just texted public information.
Okay, thanks.
Got it.
Yeah, they said they're making it even easier next go around. So
Nice.
they said we'll get some emails about it. So in case I forget, let me know.
Okay. Cool.
All right.